Why was everyone laughing at her? The question hung in the air like static before a storm. On the command bridge of the Crucible, Starfall Academy's pride and most advanced simulation deck, laughter rolled through the ranks of fresh cadets like a wave of arrogance breaking against an unseen wall. They were young, polished, and hungry. Every gesture crisp, every smile rehearsed. They carried themselves like they already owned the stars. And yet, all their confidence seemed to orbit around a single target, a woman who hadn't said a word since she stepped onto the deck. "Who even let you on this bridge?" Cadet Commander Marcus Thorne's voice sliced through the room, sharp, sure, dripping with mock courtesy. "Janitorial staff gets lost easily. This deck is for commissioned officers and active trainees, not visitors on field trips." A ripple of laughter followed him, nervous and eager. The kind of laughter that belonged to people still unsure of their own strength, but desperate to prove allegiance to whoever sounded powerful. The woman didn't answer. She stood near the AF sensor station, silent, unmoving, hands loosely clasped behind her back. Her posture was relaxed, yet strangely precise. She didn't flinch under the cadets' mockery. She didn't even glance their way. Her gaze stayed fixed on the view screen, a vast projection of stars slowly rotating across the black, simulated void. Captain Eva Rostova watched from the observation deck above, her face hidden behind the tinted glass. She'd seen hundreds of training sessions, thousands of young hopefuls pretending at command, but this was different. There was something in the woman's stance, something so profoundly still that it drew the eye the way gravity draws matter. That wasn't the posture of a lost civilian. It was the posture of someone who'd stood on real bridges, under real fire. Someone who'd seen the void beyond simulation and stared back at it without blinking. Down below, Cadet Thorne mistook her silence for weakness. "Ma'am," he continued, taking a step forward, his boots clicking against the deck. "If you're lost, the observation lounge is down 2 decks. I'd be happy to escort you there before the simulator starts. Wouldn't want you getting hurt when things get realistic." More laughter. The woman remained quiet. Her eyes flickered faintly in the reflection of the starfield, 1,000 light-years of patience compressed into a single glance. She wore no insignia, no medal, nothing that could tether her to any visible authority. Her hair was silver gray, tied back in a functional knot. The cardigan she wore, soft, old, and gray, seemed almost absurd against the gleaming metal of the command deck. To the cadets, she looked like someone's grandmother who had wandered into their universe by mistake. To Captain Rostova, she looked like a mystery waiting to uncoil. Thorne moved closer, sensing opportunity. He'd been trained to read weakness and crush it, a habit that felt like leadership to those who'd never led anyone through fear. His reputation in the academy was legendary, top of his class, unbroken string of simulation wins, a future captain with his name already whispered among fleet evaluators. He wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake, not yet, but arrogance has a way of rotting brilliance from the inside out. The woman's calm was unbearable to him. It was like punching water. Every insult he threw only drowned itself in her silence. "What's in the bag?" he asked suddenly. His eyes dropped to the small, worn leather satchel resting at her feet. "Lunch, knitting tools, maybe your visitor pass since you seem to have lost your way." Still no response. Her voice, when it finally came, was low, smooth, deliberate, almost soothing. "That is my personal property, Cadet." No anger, no challenge, just calm acknowledgement, as if she were reminding him of gravity or sunrise, something that existed beyond the reach of his ego. That tone, unshaken, unafraid, stoked something in him. He needed her to react, needed proof of dominance. "Under Fleet Regulation 74 Gamma," he said, inventing the code without hesitation, "unauthorized personnel on secure decks are subject to search for operational safety. Your presence is unauthorized. Therefore, your bag is subject to search." The crowd murmured approval. "Fenris Jacks," Thorne ordered, gesturing to two of his followers. "Secure the bag." They hesitated, just for a heartbeat, the quiet tug of conscience. But hesitation dies quickly under the weight of peer pressure. The two cadets stepped forward, their movements jerky and uncertain. The woman turned her head toward them. Not fully, just enough for her gaze to touch theirs. It wasn't a glare, it wasn't even disapproval. It was simply observation. Cold and clinical, like a teacher studying students who just failed the first test. That look froze them more effectively than any shouted command. "Now, cadets," Thorne barked. The hesitation broke. Fenris reached down and picked up the satchel. It was heavier than expected. The clasp was old, worn smooth by time and use. His fingers trembled slightly as he worked it open. The crowd leaned in. They wanted something, anything to laugh at. A book of poetry, a sandwich, a trinket. Something that confirmed what they already believed, that she didn't belong here. But what came out of that bag silenced the room. The first object was a small block of polished obsidian, dark as space, cold as truth. Etched across its face were characters no cadet should have ever seen in person. An on-block clip, a data core used only for top-level classified briefings. The air shifted. You could feel the temperature drop. Fenris's hand shook. Jax reached in again and pulled out a folded piece of fabric. He unfolded it, and the sight of it punched the air from every chest in the room. It wasn't the flag of any planet or fleet division they knew. It was black, pure, lightless black, and at its center a single silver star weeping a single tear. The flag of the Ghost Fleet. A name whispered more than spoken, a myth passed down from instructors who swore it never existed. A Black Ops command operating beyond charts and archives, where missions were recorded only in blood and silence. Every cadet froze, every smirk dissolved. Thorne's mouth went dry. The weight of realization pressed on him like a collapsing hull. He wanted to humiliate an old woman. He just desecrated a relic of military legend. Before anyone could breathe, a sharp alarm shattered the silence. The simulator roared to life, klaxons blaring, consoles flashing, the starfield on the view screen twisting into a violent swirl. The Serpent's Coil. The final exam. A command scenario designed to break even the best students. A collapsing wormhole, hostile fleets, and an unwinnable choice. Thorne swallowed hard. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked before it found its rhythm again. All stations, defensive positions, evasive maneuvers Delta 7, shields to full. Cadets stumbled to their posts, panic bleeding through their training. The simulated ship shook under the impact of phantom torpedoes. Consoles sparked, alarms screamed, red lights strobed across the bridge. But no one moved with precision. Their confidence had been stripped raw. And still she stood at the back of the bridge, watching. No movement, no reaction, just that same unreadable calm. Thorne's commands turned frantic. "Engineering, route power to the port cell now." "The port cell's fluctuating, sir," a voice shouted back. "We can't bypass without a core overload." "Do it anyway," Thorne snapped. The ship lurched, another simulated hit. The noise grew unbearable. And then through the chaos, a stillness formed. She moved. Evelyn Reed stepped forward. Not quickly, not dramatically, just 2 steps, deliberate, unhurried, as if the chaos around her existed in another dimension. Her shoes made no sound on the deck. Every head turned toward her. The alarm still blared, the lights still flashed, but it was as if time had slowed around that single motion. She passed behind Thorne's chair, her cardigan brushing against the armrest like a whisper of judgment. She didn't take the command seat. She went instead to a secondary console, one of the auxiliary stations no one ever used. A young cadet sat there, frozen, eyes wide, the display before him a storm of indecipherable code. "Get up," she said quietly. He obeyed instantly. Evelyn sat down. Her fingers rested lightly on the console. The cadets watched, unsure what she could possibly do from that outdated station. But then her hands began to move. They didn't type, they flowed. It was like watching music played across glass. Commands rippled through the console faster than the eye could follow. System warnings blinked, then vanished. The collapsing wormhole stabilized on screen. "What is she?" someone whispered. But the answer came in action, not words. She wasn't inputting commands. She was rewriting the simulation itself from a user terminal, something every cadet knew was impossible. And yet the system obeyed her. Code scrolled in cascading waves across the main view screen, raw hexadecimals, energy maps, temporal distortion feeds. Evelyn's voice was low, steady. "You've been fighting the wormhole's gravity. You should have been listening to it." Her fingers moved again, reconfiguring the entire energy grid in real time. She rerouted power not around the damaged plasma conduit, but through it, converting destabilized plasma into navigational thrust. She was surfing the collapse. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of systems stabilizing. Then the alarm ceased. The flashing red lights turned solid green. The Valiant, the simulated ship they'd been piloting, emerged from the dying wormhole like a phoenix from its ashes. The room froze. No one spoke. They failed dozens of times in this scenario. Every cadet knew it was designed to be unwinnable. And yet, she had solved it not by power, but by understanding. Thorne stared at her, his world disintegrating one quiet motion at a time. Captain Rostova, still watching from above, rose slowly to her feet. She knew that pattern, those code signatures, that rhythm. She'd seen it before. 20 years ago, on a real bridge, during a real war, when a collapsing wormhole had nearly devoured her fleet. The maneuver was thought to be lost. It even had a name: the Reed Gambit. And now, the ghost who invented it was sitting quietly on her academy deck, wearing a cardigan. How could silence be louder than command? The Crucible's bridge stood frozen, a temple of disbelief. The simulation's klaxons had died away, replaced by the soft hum of stabilized systems. The stars, once twisted and chaotic, now burned quietly across the main display. The impossible had happened, and it had happened in absolute calm. Cadet Commander Thorne could still hear his heartbeat in his ears, a dull thud against the silence. The air was heavy, suffocating. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had gripped the armrests of the command chair moments ago, and they felt alien to him. Powerless, useless. The woman stood, her cardigan folding naturally around her, the ghost of the storm passing behind her eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't look proud. She simply observed her surroundings, the stunned cadets, the flickering screens, the hush of awe. Then she said softly, "Simulation complete." Her words carried weight. They landed like verdicts. The heavy doors at the rear of the bridge hissed open. Captain Eva Rostova entered. Every cadet snapped to attention on instinct except Thorne, who remained frozen in place, his body betraying him. Rostova's boots echoed across the deck as she moved toward the command center. Her presence was a force unto itself, sharp, commanding, carved from decades of hard leadership. But her eyes weren't on Thorne. They were on Evelyn Reed. Rostova had seen that face before. Not in person, but in records she was never supposed to read. Reports buried under the highest clearance. Battle logs that bore no author name, only a single code name stamped in red ink: Ghost Admiral. She hadn't believed it then. No one had. And yet here she was, standing in flesh and silence. "Status," Rostova ordered curtly. One of the cadets stammered. "Simulation outcome success, ma'am. Full extraction achieved. No critical losses." Rostova's brow tightened. "Impossible." Her eyes flicked toward the auxiliary console where lines of raw code still cascaded down the display, the remains of the maneuver. No training officer in the entire academy could have rewritten a running scenario mid-simulation. That wasn't just skill, it was architectural-level access. It was creation. Thorne stood rigidly beside his chair, feeling every molecule of air crush around him. He wanted to speak, to explain, to apologize, to justify, but his throat had locked. Every part of him knew that whatever explanation he gave would only make it worse. Ristova's gaze swept the room. Who authorized this override? Silence. Her eyes settled on the woman in gray. Did you? Evelyn met her gaze. I corrected an error. Ristova's lips pressed into a line. You realize what you did was against every simulation protocol in the academy. I'm aware. Then why? Because your cadet was about to destroy an entire crew, Evelyn said simply. And because arrogance unchecked becomes negligence. I've seen it before. Her words weren't loud, but they landed with the precision of a scalpel. The cadets flinched as if struck. Thorne's jaw tightened. He felt every syllable burn into his chest. Ristova took another step forward, studying her more closely. What's your name? Reed, she said. Evelyn Reed. The name struck like a quiet detonation in Ristova's mind. Reed. That name, she had seen it buried deep inside old encrypted files, erased from fleet rosters, listed under declassified legends. Her breath caught for the briefest second, but she masked it under steel. You're not listed in our current advisory records. I wouldn't be, Evelyn replied. I wasn't invited, I came to observe. Ristova's tone turned clipped. Observe what? The future, Evelyn said, and whether it remembers what built it. The silence that followed was surgical. No one dared move. Even the air seemed afraid to shift. Thorne could barely hold his own posture. He could feel the heat rising in his face, the weight of realization settling like stone in his gut. He had mocked her, searched her bag, exposed her flag. The Ghost Fleet. A division so secret even captains whispered about it like superstition. Black operations, impossible rescues, silent wars fought in the shadows between galaxies. Missions so classified they didn't exist, except in the memories of those who lived because of them. He'd heard stories. Everyone had. Stories of a nameless admiral who pulled fleets out of collapsing wormholes, who won wars that were never written into history. He'd thought they were myths. Now the myth was standing in front of him, human, quiet, and infinitely more terrifying than any legend. Ristova turned away briefly, her mind racing. She glanced toward her aide at the door. Bring me the visitor registry, she ordered. Authorization code Rostov Migro, Omega Zero clearance. The young lieutenant blanched. Omega Zero wasn't just high clearance. It was personal authority from command itself. He fumbled with his data pad, fingers trembling as he initiated the scan. Thorne felt like his heart was trying to escape his chest. Every moment stretched into eternity. Ristova took the data pad when it pinged. Her eyes scanned the file. Lines of text, most of them redacted, whole pages covered in black. But what wasn't redacted made her straighten. Name Reed Evelyn. Rank classified. Last held post, Fleet Admiral Command-in-Chief, Special Operations Command. Division redacted. Service hours, 120,000 plus. Status active reserve. Ristova's throat went dry. Every cadet stared at her, waiting. Then she looked back up, not at the file, not at the cadets, but at Evelyn herself. And in that moment her posture changed. The steel in her spine turned to reverence. She stood tall, squared her shoulders, and raised her right hand. The salute cut through the silence like a blade through glass. Every breath on the bridge stopped. Fleet Admiral Reed, Ristova said, voice steady, respectful, trembling only with awe. Welcome back to the fleet, ma'am. It was a moment so heavy that the universe itself seemed to pause to witness it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then slowly, hesitantly, every cadet raised their hands. Their salutes were awkward, uneven, shame-ridden, but they rose anyway. Thorne was the last. His arm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. When his hand reached his brow, he couldn't lift his eyes to meet hers. The weight of his humiliation was too vast to bear. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the gravity of realization. The woman he had mocked, dismissed, violated was not just a superior officer. She was the superior officer, the architect of half the fleet's survival, the living embodiment of everything they'd been trained to respect and had failed to. Evelyn didn't return the salute. She didn't need to. She simply nodded once, a soft gesture that carried more command than any barked order ever could. "Carry on," she said quietly. No anger, no rebuke, just quiet dismissal. Rostova lowered her hand, turning to her cadets. Her expression hardened not out of anger, but disappointment so cold it cut deeper than fury ever could. "You stand," she began, voice low, precise, each word landing like a drumbeat, "on the most advanced bridge simulation in the fleet. You wear the uniform of a service that lives and dies by discipline, by respect, and by honor." Her eyes swept the room and landed squarely on Thorne. "Today," she said, "you've shown none of those things." Thorne's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Rostova stepped closer, her gaze unflinching. "You who lead your class, you who have memorized every manual, passed every test, you have learned nothing." She raised the data pad. "You demanded to see her credentials. You mocked what you didn't understand. You searched her belongings like a street thug. You disrespected a woman whose name has been etched into the very foundation of this academy, and you didn't even know it." The cadets looked away, faces pale, eyes wide. Rostova's tone softened, but it only made it worse. "Do you know what the most dangerous weapon on a battlefield is, cadets? It isn't the enemy's fire. It isn't superior technology. It's assumption, the belief that you already know who deserves your respect." She let the words linger. The silence became heavier, deeper. Evelyn turned away, her expression unreadable. There was no triumph in her eyes, only something quieter, regret maybe, or the faint ache of memory. Rostova looked back at her, permission to debrief, Admiral. Evelyn nodded, granted. Rostova faced her cadets again. "Dismissed," she said, her voice flat, "except for you, Thorne." The cadets filed out, heads bowed, their crisp uniforms suddenly feeling heavier than armor. Thorne stayed, the last ghost in the room. He looked up finally and found Evelyn watching him, not angry, not judgmental, just seeing. He couldn't speak. There were no words that could bridge the abyss he'd created. Her eyes were calm, deep, not unkind, but unyielding. In that silence, he understood something fundamental, something no manual or simulator could ever teach. Authority isn't loud. Power doesn't shout. And dignity doesn't demand to be seen. It simply is. Rostova's voice broke the silence. "You should thank her, cadet. She saved your career and your soul." Evelyn turned toward the exit, her steps unhurried. As the doors hissed shut behind her, Thorne exhaled for the first time in minutes. His breath came shaky, uneven, heavy with shame. He had wanted to prove his dominance. Instead, he had learned humility the hard way. What happens when silence becomes legend? By nightfall, the story had already escaped the simulator. It slipped through corridors and echoing mess halls like a rumor carried by gravity itself, unstoppable, undeniable. Every cadet, every technician, every instructor whispered it under their breath. The woman on the bridge, the one they mocked, she was Fleet Admiral Evelyn Reed. And in every retelling, the silence grew louder. They said the cadets had frozen when the captain saluted her. They said the air had gone still, that even the hum of the simulator had paused to pay respect. Some said she never moved, never blinked. Others swore they saw her eyes glow faintly when the simulation collapsed, as if the stars themselves recognized her. None of it mattered. The truth was already bigger than the facts. In the dormitory levels, cadets who once idolized Thorne avoided him. Conversations ended when he entered a room. The laughter that had always followed him was replaced by silence, the kind of silence that could hollow a person out from the inside. He carried it like a sentence. When he walked the corridors of Starfall Academy, the echoes of his boots felt too loud. Every reflection in the glass seemed to judge him. Even the stars beyond the transparent walls looked distant, disapproving. He had been the best, the golden boy. Now he was the reminder, the living cautionary tale. Captain Rostova didn't speak of the incident in formal reports. She didn't need to. Everyone who mattered already knew, and those who didn't learned quickly to never underestimate the quiet ones. The Crucible Bridge, once just a simulator, had become sacred ground. Cadets walked past it slower than usual. Some even stopped to touch the cold metal of the auxiliary console where Evelyn had sat. The instructors started calling it the Admiral's perch. A single phrase began circulating in the data boards and message streams of the Academy. No attribution, no signature, just 6 quiet words. Competence is a quiet thing. No one needed to ask who said it. Thorne saw the message one night glowing on his datapad, posted anonymously across the internal comm net. The words cut through him like shrapnel, not because they condemned him, but because they reminded him. He had mocked the quiet. He had mistaken stillness for weakness. And now silence was his only teacher. Rostova called him into her office 3 days later. The room was dim, lined with relics from wars fought long before Thorne was born, old star charts, medals, fragments of shattered hull plating preserved behind glass. She sat behind her desk, hands folded. He stood at attention. "Cadet Commander Marcus Thorne," she began, her voice even but heavy, "do you understand why you're still here?" He swallowed. "Because Admiral Reed requested it, ma'am." "She did," Rostova said, nodding slowly. "She asked that you not be expelled, that you be allowed to learn." Her tone carried no warmth. Thorne didn't dare speak. "Most cadets don't survive humiliation like that," she said quietly. "They break, they leave, they find excuses to transfer to the colonies or resign their commissions altogether, but you're still here. Why?" He hesitated. "Because I have to face it." Rostova studied him for a long moment. Her expression softened just slightly. "Good. Then start by understanding what you faced that day. That woman wasn't just a legend. She's a mirror, the kind that shows you everything you'd rather not see." She stood, packing slowly behind her desk. "Arrogance feels like strength, Cadet, until you meet someone who has no need for it. Then you realize it was armor, brittle, hollow, loud armor." She stopped beside him. "You wanted to command the stars, now learn to listen to them." He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Dismissed," she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "And Thorne, you're not the first to learn this lesson, but you might be the first to deserve a second chance." When he left, the air outside felt colder. The academy lights hummed faintly against the walls. Somewhere deep inside him, the noise of his pride, the endless, restless noise, began to quiet. That night he couldn't sleep. He found himself walking the darkened corridors until he reached the observation deck overlooking the training bays. The Crucible sat below, dormant now, its lights dimmed. The same bridge where his arrogance had met its end. He pressed a hand against the glass. The reflection that looked back at him wasn't a commander anymore, just a cadet, tired, small, and humbled. Behind him, a voice spoke. "You're still here." He turned. Evelyn Reed stood in the doorway, hands clasped behind her back, the soft fabric of her cardigan blending with the shadows. She looked almost spectral in the dim light, more presence than person. He straightened immediately. "Ma'am." Her eyes flicked to the simulator below, then back to him. Most avoid this place after failure, but you came back. I had to, he said. His voice cracked on the second word. It's where I fell. Evelyn studied him for a moment. Then she moved closer, her footsteps soundless on the polished floor. She stopped beside him, gazing down at the simulator. You mistook quiet for weakness, she said softly. That's common. The young equate noise with strength because silence frightens them. Silence forces you to listen to yourself. Thorne's throat tightened. I was wrong, ma'am. Yes, she said simply, you were. He flinched, but her tone wasn't cruel, it was honest. Like gravity, undeniable, impersonal, necessary. She looked out at the stars again. Do you know what the fleet used to say about the Ghost Division? He shook his head. That we fought battles no one would ever know existed. That we won wars in silence. The truth is simpler. We did what had to be done without applause, without recognition. And we lived with the consequences. She turned to face him fully now. Her gaze held his. Pride seeks victory. Duty seeks completion. The difference defines who survives. Thorne blinked hard, his chest tightening with shame and something else, something that felt like awakening. He whispered, Why did you come back, Admiral? Her expression softened, not in a smile, but in weariness, to see if what we fought for still mattered. Her eyes drifted to the cadet insignia on his uniform, to see if the next generation remembers that service isn't about being seen, it's about being useful. He didn't know how to respond. Words felt too small. After a long pause, Evelyn said quietly, Humiliation isn't the end, Cadet. It's the beginning if you let it be. Then she turned to leave. Thorne straightened unconsciously, instinctively, like a man in the presence of something holy. Ma'am, he said quickly, thank you. She stopped at the doorway, her profile illuminated by the soft blue of the observation lights. Don't thank me, she said, earn it. And then she was gone, as silently as she'd appeared. Thorne stood alone, watching the reflection of the empty bridge below. The silence around him wasn't heavy anymore. It felt clarifying. The next morning he reported for duty an hour before the others. No announcements, no speeches. He simply worked calibrating systems, checking data feeds, repairing what had been left broken. The same cadets who once followed him with worshipful admiration now watched from a distance, confused, uncertain. They expected arrogance. They found humility instead. Over the next weeks, Thorne stopped competing with them. He started helping, quietly, without credit. When a new recruit struggled with command protocols, he stayed after class to explain them. When another cadet froze during a navigation drill, he guided her through it until she succeeded. He didn't say why, he didn't need to. Some noticed, some didn't, but those who did began to mirror him. One by one, the loud voices softened. The laughter turned genuine. And somewhere far above, Captain Ristova watched it all unfold. She never told him, but Evelyn had left a message for her before she departed the academy. Do not punish the boy. Let him carry the weight. If he can stand beneath it, he'll rise higher than any of them. Ristova had read it twice, and for the first time in years she'd smiled. Weeks passed. The academy moved on. But the name Evelyn Reed became something different, not just legend, but law. Instructors spoke her words before simulations began. Competence is a quiet thing. Cadets whispered them before exams. And for Thorne, those words were no longer punishment. They were purpose. He carried them like a compass. Every time he doubted himself, every time pride tried to whisper again, he remembered that soft, quiet voice on the observation deck, reminding him that silence wasn't emptiness. It was strength. He had walked into that simulation, a commander in training. He was becoming something else now, a leader in progress. And though he didn't know it yet, Evelyn Reed's shadow would follow him for the rest of his life, not as a burden, but as a guide. What happens when a legend stops being a story and becomes a standard? Months passed, but the air at Starfall Academy never fully settled. Something had changed in its orbit. The cadets still trained, marched, saluted, and competed, but an invisible current now pulsed beneath every order and every exercise reverence. It wasn't fear. It wasn't worship. It was the quiet awareness that someone, somewhere, might be watching, someone who carried the weight of the stars in her silence. The incident aboard the Crucible had no official record. There was no line in the logs, no notation in the Academy archives. And yet, everyone knew. The story lived in whispers and in small rituals. Some cadets paused before taking their stations, touching the cold surface of their consoles in silent respect. Others carried a single folded scrap of black cloth in their pockets, a symbolic reminder of the ghost fleet's unseen presence. The myth had become doctrine, and at the center of it all was Marcus Thorne, the cadet who had fallen hardest and who was now learning how to rise differently. He no longer led with volume. His words, once sharp commands, had softened into steady guidance. When others faltered during simulation drills, he didn't bark, he corrected. When they succeeded, he didn't praise loudly, he nodded once, letting their own pride speak for them. At first, his peers didn't know how to respond. They waited for the old Thorne to return, the one who had filled every silence with noise, every pause with self-importance. But that Thorne was gone, stripped away by shame and rebuilt by reflection. Captain Rostova noticed. During one early morning navigation session, she stood behind the observation glass, arms folded. The cadets below worked through the same scenario they'd all failed before, the serpent's coil. This time, Thorne wasn't in command. He had volunteered to act as navigator. His new commander, Cadet Rana Solis, was trembling. The simulation was brutal, designed to break confidence through overload. But Thorne didn't take control. He whispered advice, steady, calm. "Watch the gravitational drift. Don't fight it, listen to it," he murmured. His tone echoed another voice, one that had spoken those same words months ago. The simulation ended. They survived. Not perfectly, not elegantly, but they survived. When Rostova debriefed them, she said nothing about Evelyn Reed. She didn't have to. The lesson was already there, living, breathing, replicated in the cadets' teamwork. That night, as Thorne walked back to the dorm wing, he saw the plaque. It had been installed quietly, without ceremony, below the auxiliary console where Evelyn had sat. A simple brass rectangle, no name, no emblem, just one inscription. "Competence is a quiet thing." He stood there for a long time, his reflection trembling in the polished metal. Then, almost without realizing it, he saluted. Not out of obligation, out of gratitude. Over the following cycles, the phrase spread beyond the academy. Officers visiting for training exercises carried it back to their fleets. Within a year, it appeared etched on control panels, scrawled on toolboxes, and whispered in command briefings. The ghost fleet had been myth. Now, the silent Admiral had become a creed. No one saw Evelyn Reed again, not officially. But once every few months, there were reports. A quiet civilian consultant seen boarding a classified shuttle, a faint trace of her name appearing in the clearance logs of an Admiralty session. A rumor that someone in a gray cardigan had been sitting silently in the back of a fleet design meeting, saying nothing, until a single suggestion she made saved an entire ship class from fatal design flaws. Her legend moved like she did, unseen but unstoppable. Thorne didn't speak of her often, but she lived in his memory, in every choice he made. He began keeping a journal, not to write about her, but to track his own transformation. His first entry read, "If arrogance blinds you to others, humility will teach you to see again. The Admiral didn't humiliate me. She returned my sight." He trained relentlessly, driven not by ambition but by the quiet hunger to be useful. His scores rose again, not perfect, not spotless, but steady. He no longer cared about medals, he cared about meaning. 2 years later, the Academy's graduation hall overflowed. The commandant delivered the closing address with the usual pride and pageantry, but everyone knew which name hung silently in the air, unspoken but omnipresent. When the ceremony ended, Rostova called Thorne aside. "Cadet Thorne," she said, a faint approving smile touching her lips, "you've changed." He nodded. "Ma'am, I just learned to listen." Rostova handed him his assignment pad. Survey Corps, Deep Space Exploration Detail. He blinked. "Not fleet combat." "No," she said. "You're not being tested for how you command. You're being tested for how you understand." He accepted the orders without argument. The younger version of himself would have protested, demanded a battleship, a high-profile command track. But the man standing there now only nodded once. "Understood, ma'am." As he turned to leave, Rostova added softly, "She would have approved." He didn't ask how she knew. He just smiled, a small, quiet smile that said enough. His first mission took him far from the Academy's gleaming corridors, into the outer drift of Federation space. His ship, the Vigilant Horizon, was small, unremarkable, a long-range survey vessel tasked with charting unmapped anomalies. The work was slow, tedious, but it was honest. He found peace in the routine, in calibrating sensor arrays, repairing comm relays, helping the junior officers navigate the loneliness of deep space. Some nights, when the stars stretched endless beyond the viewport, he would find himself thinking of her, of that soft gray cardigan, of the way her fingers had danced across the console, rewriting impossibility into salvation. He wondered where she was now. One night, as he sat alone in the observation dome, the ship's AI pinged. "Incoming encrypted message. Origin classified. Authorization, Admiral Tier." Thorne's heart skipped. He hesitated before accepting. The screen flickered static, then a short line of text appeared. "Cadet Thorne." He read it twice before realizing the old habit. She still called him Cadet. "Humility is not silence. It's discipline. Never lose it. ER." That was all. No sign-off, no coordinates, no insignia. Just 3 sentences and an ending initial. He stared at it for a long time, then saved it in a private file, encrypted, locked, unshareable. A secret reminder of what he owed. When the next anomaly mission began, he was different. His crew felt it, the way he listened before deciding, the way he led without demanding. The Vigilant Horizon became known among the fleet as the quiet ship, the one that always finished its missions, never boasted, never failed. And somewhere deep inside him, Marcus Thorne understood that the lesson Evelyn Reed had given him wasn't a correction. It was a legacy. Years later, when he returned to Starfall as a guest instructor, the cadets stared at him with the same awe he once reserved for others. He told them stories not of victory but of mistakes, of pride, of silence. He told them about the time a foolish young commander mocked a quiet stranger. He never mentioned her name. He didn't have to. The cadets listened wide-eyed, reverent. When the session ended, one of them asked, "Sir, what happened to the woman?" Thorne paused. He looked past them, through the observation window where the stars burned in infinite patience. "She reminded me," he said softly, "that silence isn't emptiness, it's mastery." Then he dismissed them. As he left the lecture hall, he passed by the crucible again. The simulator was dark now, its panels cold. The brass plaque still gleamed faintly in the corridor lights. He touched it gently, his reflection shimmering in the metal. For the first time, he realized something he'd never fully understood before. Evelyn Reed hadn't come to humiliate anyone. She had come to return something the Academy had lost, the soul of the fleet itself. And now, through him and countless others, that soul endured. When he finally turned to leave, he whispered, not to the plaque, not to the ship, but to the quiet memory that still guided him. "Thank you, Admiral." Outside, the stars waited, endless, patient, and silent. Because silence, he'd learned, wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of understanding. What good is wisdom if it can't survive the storm? The stars outside the vigilant horizon burned like embers, scattered across the black. Commander Marcus Thorne watched them through the viewport, calm, steady, composed. Years had passed since Starfall Academy, but the echoes of that day aboard the Crucible still lived somewhere deep in his bones. His uniform bore rank now. The once arrogant cadet had become a quiet officer, respected by his crew, trusted by his command. He didn't shout orders anymore. He didn't need to. When he spoke, people listened not because of authority, but because of tone. Sensor sweep complete, Ensign Vora reported from the helm. No major anomalies within range. We're still tracking residual radiation along the drift corridor. Thorne nodded. Maintain course. Minimal engine output. Let the drift carry us. The Vigilant Horizon was a small vessel by fleet standards, part research ship, part patrol scout. Its mission was to chart the uncharted, to venture quietly where others rarely went. But this sector, the Epsilon Verge, had a history of swallowing ships. Distorted gravity wells, static interference, unexplained energy pulses. The kind of place where noise could kill you. The crew had grown restless. The last 3 days had been uneventful, quiet even by exploration standards. But Thorne had learned long ago quiet didn't mean safe. He sat in the captain's chair, reading through telemetry logs, his expression unreadable. Lieutenant Juno, his tactical officer, glanced over. "Sir, permission to ask a personal question." "Go ahead." She hesitated. "Is it true you trained under the silent Admiral?" The question caught a few glances from nearby consoles. Even after all these years, the name still carried weight, whispered, never spoken too loudly, as if the stars themselves might be listening. Thorne smiled faintly. "No one trains under her, you just learn when she lets you." Juno nodded slowly. "They say she doesn't exist, that she's a story they tell cadets to scare the pride out of them." "She exists," Thorne said quietly, "and she doesn't need stories." He looked out at the black horizon beyond the glass. "When she walks into a room, you just know." Before Juno could respond, the ship's console chirped sharply. "Captain," Vora said, brow furrowed. "I'm reading something off the port bow. It's faint, irregular, looks like a distress beacon, but the signal's degraded." "Origin?" "Unknown, the frequency's ancient, could be pre-war era tech." Thorne stood, moving to the sensor display. The waveform was erratic, flickering in and out like a heartbeat fading through static. He felt something twist in his gut, an old instinct. "Can you isolate it?" "Trying, sir. Wait, it's repeating. Code pattern Delta 98. Thorne's eyes narrowed. "That's a fleet pattern, long-range emergency broadcast." "Sir, it's decades old," Juno said. "No fleet ship been in this sector in years." Thorne didn't answer. He stared at the pattern, watching the ghost of a transmission loop through the void. It was faint, nearly dead, but deliberate. He turned. "Helm, adjust course, bring us toward the beacon, 1/4 impulse, keep deflectors at passive." "Aye, sir." The Vigilant Horizon glided forward into the dark. The deeper they went, the stranger the readings became. Gravity fluxes spiked and dropped with no visible source. Space itself seemed to hum with something unseen, like the echo of a long-forgotten machine still running somewhere in the dark. Minutes stretched into hours, then suddenly a shape appeared. "Contact," Vora's voice broke the silence. "Bearing 035, visual confirmation it's a ship." "On screen," Thorne ordered. The display flickered, and the bridge fell silent. Floating dead ahead, half-shrouded in drifting dust, was the wreck of an old Terran fleet cruiser. Its hull was fractured, scorched, and silent. No running lights, no transponders, no life signs. The markings along the side were almost erased by time, but one symbol still clung to the metal, faint but unmistakable. A single silver star weeping a single tear. The emblem of the Ghost Fleet. Thorne's breath caught. The crew stared speechless. Juno whispered, "Sir, that ship shouldn't exist." "No," Thorne murmured, "but it does." He stepped closer to the screen, his reflection merging with the ruins of the vessel beyond. "Helm, bring us within 1 kilometer. Keep shields steady." As they approached, the magnitude of the wreck became clear. The ship was massive, far larger than the vigilant horizon. Entire decks were exposed to the vacuum, torn open like old wounds. The hull ID finally came into view. TFS Valiant. The name hit Thorne like gravity, his voice caught. The Valiant. Vora nodded slowly. It matches old Ghost Fleet registry data, if those even count as official. He stared. That was the ship from the Crucible's simulation. The one they'd flown under Evelyn Reed's quiet command. The ship she'd saved with her impossible maneuver, the Reed Gambit. Except this wasn't a simulation. And it was real. "Scan for power signatures," Thorne said, his voice low. "Minimal, sir. Faint energy readings in the forward decks, residual. Might just be decaying reactors." "Any sign of a black box?" "Possible, but the magnetic interference is a mess." Juno turned to him. "Captain, you're not thinking of boarding it, are you?" Thorne's gaze never left the screen. "She saved me once when I didn't deserve it. I owe her that much." The crew exchanged uncertain glances. No one argued. Minutes later, Thorne led the away team through the docking hatch, stepping into the husk of the Valiant. The air was stale, metallic, laced with the silence of years. Their helmet lights cut through floating dust and drifting debris. Every corridor was a graveyard. Scorched walls, shattered panels, the ghosts of war frozen in place. "Power cells are empty," Juno reported. "No artificial gravity. This thing's been here for decades." Thorne's voice came through the comm softly. "Keep your sensors active. If anything still functions, I want to know." As they moved deeper, the air thickened with history. Thorne could feel it pressing against him, the weight of everything this ship had once carried. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy. And then they found it. A sealed command bridge. The doors were fused, but the old manual lock still responded to pressure. Thorne placed a gloved hand against the metal, pushing until it gave with a soft, reluctant groan. The bridge lay in ruin, panels shattered, consoles dark. The great viewing screen was cracked but intact enough to reflect their helmet lights. Thorne's gaze swept the room, then froze. There at the auxiliary console lay a small, collapsed chair. And beside it, a simple gray cardigan, folded neatly over the armrest. No dust, no decay, no sign of age. As if it had been placed there yesterday. Thorne approached slowly, every breath shallow. He reached out, touching the fabric gently. It was cold but real. Juno whispered, "That can't be possible." He didn't answer, he couldn't. There was a faint hum, subtle, rhythmic, coming from beneath the console. Vora crouched down, scanning. "Sir, I think there's a data core still active. Old tech but still running." Thorne knelt. A soft blue glow pulsed from within the terminal. He brushed away the dust, revealing an ancient on-block clip embedded in the system. The same kind he'd once seen pulled from Evelyn's satchel all those years ago. He tapped his comm. "Engineering, prep for data retrieval. We've found something alive down here." The moment the link engaged, a voice filled his helmet speakers. Soft, calm, familiar. "Hello, Cadet." Every muscle in Thorne's body froze. Juno's eyes went wide. "Sir, who was that?" Thorne didn't move, his throat tightened. Playback source. "Unknown," Vora said, her voice trembling. "It's coming directly from the core." The voice spoke again, faint, as though carried across decades of static. "If you're hearing this, then you've learned the first lesson. but the second is harder. The sound of Evelyn Reed's voice filled the dead bridge, soft, resolute, timeless. Humility without action is regret. You can listen forever, but someday you must act quietly, decisively, without pride. The universe will test that silence again. Be ready. The transmission ended. Silence fell. Thorne knelt there for a long time, staring at the dead console, his reflection ghosted in the cracked screen. He felt his chest tighten, grief, awe, gratitude all at once. Juno spoke quietly. "Sir, what do we do now?" Thorne rose slowly. "We finish what she started." He turned toward the viewport, watching the endless drift of the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, Evelyn Reed was still alive, or perhaps her legacy was. It didn't matter which. What mattered was the message, and the quiet that followed it. Because silence wasn't the absence of command. It was command mastered. As the vigilant horizon pulled away from the wreck, the old cruiser drifted behind them, a monument to everything the fleet had forgotten and everything it was still meant to be. Thorne stood on the bridge, the gray cardigan folded carefully beside his console. He didn't speak for a long time. Then softly he said, "Helm, set course for the next drift sector. Let's keep listening." And somewhere, in the long quiet between stars, it almost felt like the universe nodded in approval. What do you do when silence meets chaos? 3 weeks after the Valiant's discovery, the vigilant horizon drifted through the outer rim of the Epsilon Verge, a void so dark it made starlight seem like memory. The crew had changed since then. They moved slower, spoke softer, listened more. Even the air on the bridge carried a kind of reverent quiet, as if the ghost of Evelyn Reed still stood among them. But peace in space never lasts. At 400 hours ship time, the emergency klaxon shattered the silence. "Unidentified energy surge," Ensign Vora shouted. "Bearing 247, magnitude increasing." Source: Thorne was already at the command chair. "Unknown, sir. Gravitational wave may be artificial. It's pulling us in." The ship lurched. Consoles flickered. Crew members grabbed for stability rails as the inertial dampeners strained to compensate. Engines full reverse. Negative response. We're caught in a collapse vector. The deck trembled, deep, bone-level vibration. On the display, the black void ahead twisted like liquid glass. Thorne's voice stayed calm. "Analysis, what's pulling us?" Juno's hands moved across her console. "Localized distortion field, not natural. Someone built this." The ship jolted again, a violent shudder that threw sparks from a nearby terminal. Vora yelled, "Shields down to 60%, sir, if we don't break free." "Steady," Thorne said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Reduce power to half. Let the field take us in slowly. Don't fight the current." The crew stared at him. It sounded insane, like surrender. But he remembered her voice. "You've been fighting the wormhole's gravity. You should have been listening to it." They obeyed. The engines dimmed, the noise subsided, and the violent shudder smoothed into a steady pull. The reading stabilized. The vigilant horizon slid deeper into the distortion, until a shape emerged ahead, vast, dark and pulsing with cold blue light. A station. Ancient, derelict, built into the spine of a collapsing asteroid. The source of the anomaly. "Sir," Juno whispered, "that's not fleet tech, not anything on record." Thorne studied it, the skeletal towers, the broken antenna arrays, the faint hum of impossible energy looping in and out of existence. "Take us into synchronous orbit, minimal thrust, keep comms open." As they approached, the sensors flared. "Reading faint power signatures inside," Vora said. "Artificial life support, and something else. Organic traces multiple." Thorne's jaw tightened. "Survivors?" "Maybe, hard to tell, it's unstable." He didn't hesitate. "Prep an away team." Minutes later, the shuttle detached and drifted toward the derelict. The light from the horizon's hull faded behind them until the void swallowed everything but the station's dim pulse. The docking port aligned. The magnetic clamps hissed. The hatch cycled open with a groan like something exhaling after centuries. Inside, the corridors were narrow and cold. Frost lined the walls. Their helmet lights cut narrow beams through the dark. The place smelled of old metal and ozone, the scent of forgotten machinery. Juno's voice echoed through the comms. "This doesn't look abandoned. Systems are old but not dead. Someone's maintaining them." "Then we'll find out who," Thorne said. They reached a central chamber, circular, lined with consoles whose designs didn't match any known fleet standard. A single holographic core flickered weakly in the center, projecting faint light onto the walls. Vora crouched beside a terminal, its looping power to one system, environmental stabilization, the rest's locked down. Thorne approached the holographic node. A faint shimmer pulsed, forming vague symbols that twisted and rearranged as if trying to communicate. Then the static cleared and a face appeared. Flickering, incomplete, but recognizable. Evelyn Raid. Her voice was fragmented, laced with interference. "If you've found this, then you are standing in what remains of Operation Silent Echo." The crew froze. This station was built to seal an unstable gravitational anomaly, a weapon once thought controllable. We were wrong. It feeds on energy, on motion, on noise. The recording stuttered. "If anyone returns here, listen carefully. Do not fight it. Quiet the engines. Silence the systems. The void only hungers for movement. Let it starve." Then the image vanished. Silence swallowed the chamber. Juno turned slowly toward Thorne. "Sir, she built this place." He nodded once, "And she died here trying to contain it." Vora's console beeped suddenly. "Sir, power surge. The station's core is waking up. Something's triggering it." "By what?" She glanced at her readouts, then froze. "By us." The floor shook, the walls groaned. "Back to the shuttle," Thorne ordered. They ran through the narrow corridors, boots echoing in the metallic hollow. The sound, every footstep, every shout reverberated unnaturally, bouncing off the walls and returning amplified. Juno stumbled as the corridor twisted, metal folding like liquid under pressure. "Sir, this whole place is reacting to sound." "Then stop talking." They moved in silence now, running breathless through the shifting dark, the sound of their heartbeats thudding in their ears. The lights dimmed, swallowed by the pulsating blue glow growing from beneath the deck. Thorne reached the docking bay first. The shuttle hung half-detached, the clamps straining. He motioned sharply, "Go." The crew climbed aboard, the hatch sealed. The engines ignited softly, barely above a whisper. Vora's hands trembled over the controls. "Minimal thrust only, sir. Anything stronger will wake it again." Thorne nodded. "Ease us out." The shuttle drifted backward, agonizingly slow. The station's hum grew louder, pulsing like a heartbeat. A tendril of light erupted from the core, raw gravitational energy stretching outward, hungry, alive. It struck the shuttle's hull with a dull, metallic clang. They were caught again. "Containment field failing," Juno yelled. Thorne's mind raced. The readings flashed before him, same kind of collapse vector as the wormhole from the crucible, the same pattern. And he remembered her words, her voice recorded across time. "Humility without action is regret." He looked at the control interface, then at the crew. "Reroute main power to the external plating. We're going to bleed energy, not fight it." Vora's eyes widened. "Sir, that could drain us completely." "Then we drift, but we live." She hesitated, then obeyed. The shuttle's panels glowed faintly, energy diffusing from the hull like mist. The gravitational tendrils tightened, then faltered, their pull weakening. The hum in the distance dropped a pitch. "It's working," Juno whispered. The field stabilizing. Thorne exhaled slowly, watching the readings level out. Silence the engines, he said softly. All systems passive. The shuttle floated powerless, still, surrounded by the slow pulse of dying light. The station went quiet, completely quiet. Then, after a long minute, the tendrils retracted. The energy collapsed inward and was gone. The crew sat motionless, barely breathing. The silence was absolute. Thorne's heartbeat echoed in his own ears. "Signal the horizon," he said quietly. "Low-frequency burst only. Tell them to prepare for tow retrieval. We're not lighting engines in this sector again." Vora nodded, hands trembling as she tapped the emergency comms. As they waited, Juno turned to Thorne. "How did you know that would work?" He looked out the viewport, watching the distant shimmer of the fatting anomaly. "Because someone once told me that not every fight is won by resistance." She studied him. "You mean Admiral Reed?" Thorne's expression softened. "No, I mean the voice she left behind." When the vigilant horizon finally towed them free, the derelict station collapsed inward, folding into a pinpoint of light before vanishing altogether. Back aboard his ship, Thorne stood alone on the bridge, looking out at the quiet expanse of space. His hands rested on the console. His reflection stared back at him, older now, steadier, defined not by command but by composure. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small on-block chip they had recovered from the Valiant, the same one containing her recorded message. He placed it gently on the console. For a moment he thought he heard her voice again, soft as memory. "Sometimes the only way to command the storm is to listen to it." He smiled faintly. "Understood, Admiral," he whispered. Outside, the stars shimmered in endless silence. And in that silence, he found something he hadn't realized he was missing: peace. The kind of peace only the truly humbled ever earn. How do you lead when everyone is watching and no one believes you're right? The call came in at 300. A fleet-wide priority alert. Every command vessel was to converge on the frontier near the Vexen Rift, a region known for its gravitational instability and unpredictable warping storms. A civilian convoy had sent out a mayday. 2 ships trapped in the rift's event horizon. A rescue was underway, but communications from the lead cruiser had gone dark. Commander Marcus Thorne didn't hesitate. Within minutes, the vigilant horizon was under full burn, engines slicing through the cold dark. The crew worked in silence, not because of fear, but because that was how they operated now. Quietly, efficiently. On the main display, the rift loomed, a swirl of fractured light, bending stars around it like a shattered mirror. Even the void seemed to pulse with warning. Juno studied the readings. "Sir, the magnetic distortion is off the charts. Navigational sensors are losing calibration every 30 seconds. Keep manual backups ready," Thorne said. "Fleet Command just transmitted a message," Vora added. "Admiral Derek's taking operational lead. He's ordered all vessels to hold outside the rift until his flagship stabilizes the rescue corridor." Thorne looked at the data again. The flagship TFS Gallant was already deep inside the anomaly. Its signal was flickering. "They're not stabilizing anything," he said. "They're stuck." "Sir." He stood, eyes fixed on the holographic display. "That field's growing. If they stay in there, they'll be crushed before the distortion collapses." Juno hesitated. "Then we should warn them." "They already know," Thorne said softly, "but pride makes people deaf." He remembered the arrogance he once carried, the same blind certainty that had nearly destroyed him. Now, that same blindness was threatening a fleet. He opened the comm channel anyway. "Fleet Command, this is Commander Thorne of the Vigilant Horizon. I recommend immediate withdrawal from the rift. You're inside an active gravitational shear. Stabilizers will fail." Static, then a voice came through, cold, irritated. "Commander Thorne, your orders are to hold position. The gallant systems are more than capable of managing the rift. Do not interfere. The channel cut. Thorne exhaled slowly. Of course not. Juno looked at him. Sir, what now? He stared at the swirling chaos on the screen. The same kind of impossible problem he'd once watched Evelyn Reed solve with nothing but calm and courage. He turned to his crew. We're going in. The words landed like gravity. Sir, command explicitly ordered. I know what they ordered, Thorne said, his tone steady. And I know what's about to happen if we wait. Silence. Then Juno nodded. Aye, sir. The vigilant horizon descended into the rift. The stars warped into streams of light as the gravitational currents twisted space around them. Every sensor screamed with contradictory data. Reality itself bent like heat shimmer. Thorne kept his eyes on the instruments. Ease power to the drives. Match the distortion's rhythm, not its resistance. The crew obeyed, and slowly the shaking lessened. They began to drift along the current instead of against it, riding the rift's chaos the way Evelyn had once surfed a collapsing wormhole. They found the Gallant minutes later. It was massive, a proud warship, caught like an insect in amber. Its hull was splitting under the strain, shields flickering as gravitational eddies tore at its frame. The convoy ships it had tried to save were tethered nearby, their engines dead, their crews trapped. Open a channel, Thorne said. The image of Admiral Derek filled the screen, older, iron-haired, his expression tight with command authority and pride. Thorne, you disobeyed a direct order. Thorne didn't flinch. Admiral, your ship, caught in a gravitational loop. If you try to stabilize from inside, it'll crush your core within 5 minutes. We can manage our own ship, Commander. Fall back to safe distance. Sir, Thorne said evenly, respectfully, that's not true. You're already past the stability threshold. Derek's glare could have frozen air. You're out of line, Commander. One more transmission and I'll have your commission. The channel cut again. Thorne stood motionless. Around him the crew waited silent, eyes fixed on him. He could order a retreat. It would be the safe choice. The lawful choice, but not the right one. He looked at the dying ships on the display, the flickering hulls, the desperate distress signals, the people inside who didn't even know who he was. He thought of Evelyn, of her calm in the simulator, of her voice saying, "True authority doesn't announce itself, it simply acts." He turned to Juno. "Prepare a tether beam, target the convoy first. We're going to pull them out manually." Her eyes widened. "Sir, the Gallant will see us." "I hope they do," Thorne said. "Maybe they'll remember what command is supposed to mean." The vigilant horizon moved closer, its deflectors flaring faintly as the rift's energy lashed around it. The crew worked fast, precision overriding fear. "Tether locked," Vora shouted, "bringing up thrust now." The engines roared and the ship groaned in protest. Warning lights flared red. "Keep it steady," Thorne said. "Transfer power from auxiliary systems. Let the current help us." The deck rattled violently. A shockwave rolled through the rift, a soundless scream of energy tearing itself apart. Then, one by one, the convoy ships broke free. Cheers erupted, but Thorne didn't smile yet. "Maintain pull, don't lose alignment." As they cleared the last civilian vessel, the Gallant's voice cut through the calm again, frantic now. "Horizon, our stabilizers are gone. We're losing containment." Thorne's voice was calm. "You're too deep. Shut down your drives and let us tow you out." "Negative. We'll tear you apart if we." "Then you'll tear yourself apart faster." Derek hesitated. Pride and panic fought behind his eyes. Finally he said, "Do it." The tether beams locked. The two ships connected, one massive, one small. The rift howled around them, space folding and stretching in violent waves. "Helm," Thorne said, "match the pulse pattern from the core. Ride the wave, don't resist." It was the same principle Evelyn had lived by. and for the first time he understood it fully. They moved as one, the horizon guiding, the gallant following, two ships dancing with gravity. The rift raged, but Thorne didn't raise his voice once. He spoke softly, clearly, giving short commands with surgical precision. His calm became the anchor the crew clung to. Even through terror, they found rhythm in his silence. The rift began to collapse. Light burst around them, wild, blinding. And then, in a heartbeat of deafening stillness, they were through. The ships emerged into open space, battered but alive. The crew erupted in relief. Some cried. Some simply laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from surviving something that should have killed you. Thorne didn't speak. He just stared at the viewscreen, at the calm expanse of stars. After a long silence, the comm pinged. Admiral Derek's voice came through, subdued, shaken. "Commander Thorne, you disobeyed direct orders." "Yes, sir." "You also saved 2 ships and 300 lives." Thorne didn't answer. There was a pause, then Derek's voice softened. "How did you know what to do in there?" Thorne looked at the gray cardigan folded neatly on the console beside him, the same one he'd kept since the Valiant. "Someone taught me once," he said quietly, "to listen before acting, to let the storm speak first." "A good lesson," Derek said. "Where did you learn it?" Thorne smiled faintly. "From a woman the fleet forgot but never deserved." The comm cut. The bridge fell into gentle quiet. The hum of stabilized systems filled the silence like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. Juno turned toward him, eyes wide, voice trembling with respect. "Sir, if she could see this." "She'd tell me to stop talking," Thorne said with a small smile, "and get back to work." The crew chuckled softly, the kind of laugh born from shared exhaustion and reverence. Thorne sank into the command chair. Outside, the rift shrank into the distance, a dying storm behind them. He leaned back, eyes half closed, remembering Evelyn Reed's calm on that first day, her stillness in the face of mockery, her silence that spoke louder than any threat. He finally understood it. Silence wasn't emptiness, it was mastery. Command wasn't control, it was grace under gravity. And respect, true respect, wasn't demanded. It was earned in the quiet between words. As the vigilant horizon sailed on, a single phrase echoed in Thorne's mind, not as memory, but as truth. Competence is a quiet thing. And sometimes, it's the only thing that saves you. How do legends end, with thunder or with silence? Years passed. The fleet changed. Commanders came and went, uniforms redesigned, ships rebuilt. But in the quiet corridors of every academy, every control deck, and every simulation room, a whisper survived. They called it the Reed Principle. No one knew where it started, but cadets spoke of it like scripture. It wasn't written in manuals, and it wasn't enforced by protocol. It was something deeper, a way of being. A code shared in glances and gestures, the pause before a command, the breath between decisions, the awareness that authority wasn't sound, it was silence understood. And in that silence, Evelyn Reed still lived. Commander Marcus Thorne, now captain, sat alone in the viewing dome of the vigilant horizon. The ship had been refitted, its hull gleaming in the pale light of a distant star. Around him, the hum of the engines was soft and rhythmic, the heartbeat of a vessel that had outlived its class and its purpose, just like him. He had silver in his hair now, fewer medals than he deserved, more peace than he expected. Outside, the horizon stretched into infinite darkness, vast, endless, patient. He watched it for a long time before he spoke. "Computer, open message file, designation ER." A gentle tone answered, "File open." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Playback message 3." Static, then her voice soft, calm, still carrying that unshakable clarity even across years of digital decay. "If you've reached this far, you've already learned what most never do. Leadership isn't volume, it's rhythm, and silence is where rhythm lives. Thorne closed his eyes. He could almost see her again, standing in that gray cardigan, hands folded behind her back, quiet among the chaos. Someday, her voice continued, someone will ask where you learned command. Don't say my name. Say you learned it from failure. That's where I found it too. The message ended. Thorne sat there still. The hum of the ship filled the silence she left behind. He didn't notice Juno enter until she spoke softly from the doorway. You still listen to her. He smiled. Every captain should have a better voice in their head. She stepped closer, standing beside him, watching the stars. You know, they're nomming a new fleet training center on Europa. They want to call it the Reed Academy. He turned to her, surprised. They finally admitted she existed. Juno nodded. The Command Council voted last month. Someone dug up the old Crucible logs. Turns out they had her signature on the simulation redesigns. She'd been listed as consultant, tactical oversight. They can't erase her now. Thorne chuckled softly. They never could. She was written into people, not paper. For a while, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of the things words couldn't carry. Finally, Juno said, You're on the list, you know. They want you to speak at the dedication. He shook his head. No, let them write their speeches. I've said enough in this life. She smiled. Then what will you do? He looked back at the stars, infinite, unjudging. Keep listening. Later that night, Thorne walked the quiet decks of the ship. The lights were dimmed, the corridors empty. He paused at the old brass plaque near the navigation console, the one that simply read, Competence is a quiet thing. He touched it gently. The metal was cool under his fingertips. He remembered the first time he'd seen those words, when they'd made him feel small, ashamed. Now they made him feel something else entirely, grateful. The next morning, he transmitted his resignation to Fleet Command. No fanfare, no speeches, just a single message attached. Serving was an honor, listening was the lesson. Then he signed his name, not as captain, not as commander, but simply Marcus Thorne. He left the vigilant horizon docked at the edge of the outer colonies, a living monument to everything he'd learned. Then he disappeared from the registry logs, the way Evelyn Reed once had. Years passed again. Fleet cadets came and went. They trained in the Reed Academy, bright-eyed, hopeful, nervous. They walked through glass corridors lined with starlight, unaware that the building itself was a rebirth of a forgotten ideal. In the central hall stood a statue, not grand or heroic, simple. A woman in a plain uniform, her posture calm, one hand resting lightly on a console, eyes forward. No weapon, no insignia, no smile. The plaque beneath her read, Fleet Admiral Evelyn Reed. She taught us that silence is not the absence of command, but its proof. No one knew where the likeness came from. Some said an old cadet described her from memory. Others believed Thorne had left a holo-sketch before vanishing. Either way, it didn't matter. Her story had finally come home. Every year, new officers would gather there in silence before deployment. No speeches, no music, no orders, just reflection. Some placed their hands on the statue's base, a quiet ritual passed down through generations. And sometimes, in the still air of that hall, when the lights dimmed and the starlight bled through the dome, it almost felt like she was still there, not as a ghost, but as a presence. Not watching, listening. One evening, long after the crowds had gone, a lone officer walked the hall. Her uniform was that of a fleet instructor. Her rank insignia glimmered faintly in the dim light. She stopped in front of the statue, setting a small, weathered en-bloc chip at its base. She whispered, "For you, from him." Then she turned and left. The chip flickered faintly, a soft blue pulse, and then played one final message. Admiral, Thorne's voice said, aged but calm, "I never got to thank you properly. so this will have to do. A pause. You were right about silence. It's not the absence of words, it's the space that gives them meaning. You didn't teach me how to command. You taught me how to understand. And in that understanding, I finally found peace. Another pause, his voice softened. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The message ended. The light from the chip faded. And in the deep quiet that followed, the stars outside shimmered softly as if bowing. Somewhere far beyond the reaches of fleet charts, an unregistered signal pulsed once, faint, steady, familiar. A private signature. ER. It lasted only a moment before vanishing again into the vast, endless dark. But for those who still listened, it was enough. Because legends don't end with thunder. They end the way they began, with silence that changes everything.